Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the...
Hello and welcome to Movies vs. Capitalism, an anti-capitalist movie podcast. I'm Rivka Rivera.
And I am Frank Capello. Rivka, congratulations. You did it.
I alone.
You alone ended the strike. Yes, for anyone who doesn't know, the actors, the SAG-AFTRA union, the Screen Actors Guild, has reached a tentative agreement with the AMPTP. The strike officially ended this past Thursday, November 9th, after the union approved an agreement with a unanimous vote from the negotiating committee on Wednesday, November 8th, after 118 days of striking. So, I mean, truly, I was kind of, playing it for laugh up top, but truly, congratulations. I'm so excited that the actors got a deal. How are you feeling?
I'm hyped, but I'm finding, I think in the face of what's happening in Gaza, it was just like, I'll be real, it was hard to be, I'm having trouble holding the joy. I'm just having trouble holding multiple things.
Sure.
So I just felt a little like I feel in my head about it. Like I'm excited. It's great. I'm really happy, but that's my honest truth. I'm excited, but I'm happy.
Thank you for being honest with me. I mean, I value that from you, and that I know that I'm never gonna get a sugar-coated or like a bullshitty answer. And in fact, you call me out on stuff regularly, and I love it. So please don't ever stop. I mean, not like harshly, but no, but it's one of my favorite things about doing this podcast with you is that yeah, there are times where I say things and you're like, let's re-examine that. And you're like, oh, and I'm like, oh, fuck, you're right. Let's let me back up. Let me take it again. So I appreciate that honesty.
Thank you, Frank.
Of course. All right. So we're recording this on Friday, November 10th, and the actual agreement itself, the deal points and the details have not been released. I believe they're supposed to be released sometime this afternoon. So apologies, that will already be public by the time you hear this, but what we do know about the agreement, SAG has touted the contract as, quote, valued at over $1 billion, meaning $1 billion going to the actors. The deal includes minimum pay increases and, quote, unprecedented provisions for consent and compensation related to the use of artificial intelligence by the studios. So that's the AI stuff. Again, we don't know what the details of these AI protections are yet. A couple other things that are included in this deal: actors who appear on the most watched streaming shows will also receive bonuses. They also raise the pension and health caps, and that will, according to SAG, channel more value into SAG's operating funds. And they also won critical protections for diverse communities. But one thing that we know is not in this deal is, despite SAG's various gains, it was unable to secure a cut of streaming revenues for its members, which had been a priority for the union. Initially, SAG had proposed that studios share 2% of revenue from streaming before dropping it down to 1% and then dropping it down again to 57 cents per subscriber. So this is so streaming revenue splits did not get secure, but it looks like streaming bonuses are included for shows that perform very, very well. And again, we will learn more about the specifics of the deal in the next week or so, and I'm sure on next week's episode we'll get to dig into more of those specifics. But I mean, other than the not getting the rev split from streamers, it seems like it's being touted as this is a very good deal.
Yes, this is being touted. I wish we get everything, but yay. This is the world we live in. It's amazing. It's amazing. I think the biggest win is just what it did for people to see union power. Like, this win is going to reverberate. This is going to reverberate for all unions all around. I've heard a few people kind of say things like, oh, well, now there's going to be less productions because they're going to make less stuff. I don't care. I mean, really, when you're working for so little and you had the existential crisis of AI on the table, what are we talking about?
And we also went into detail about this on last week's episode on our episode for Sorry to Bother You about how, yes, all of these networks, studios are slashing their production budgets. That is partially due to what will now be rising labor costs from the writers and actors, securing living fucking wages. But it's also because these companies had just been running on debt for like a decade. And now that the economy is squeezed, these companies actually have to, be businesses that make money. So it's not solely because labor has won here. It should also be said that still needs to be ratified by the rank and file SAG members. So I'm curious to see, once we actually get the details of the deal, if there will be, a coalition within SAG's rank and file that's like, no, we don't want this. I know that there was a small coalition within the Writers Guild, even when that tentative agreement was reached, that were like, no, go back for more. So we'll be curious to see what the response from the rank and file is. Because as you were saying, everyone is more militant now. Everyone is more willing to go back on the picket line if it means they're, going to win the things that they actually deserve. So we'll see how it actually plays out.
I think that was beautiful that came out of this moment was just the level of pride that actors felt, and the conversation around of this creative work as labor. And it's really I feel like it was a cultural moment and changed how maybe the work of an actor was viewed. There were so many important conversations that were had because of the strike, and the value that actors have in culture and the value of art in culture. I would say it's one of the most valuable things that we have. And it certainly proved that without our labor, we could shut a whole bunch of the economy down. And I think that was really, really crucial.
All right. So we will, I'm sure, touch on this again next week once we actually know more about this deal. So we should get to our conversation today, a very fun conversation about the film Clueless. But before we do, just want to let you all know that this podcast is produced by the two of us.
We perform all of the necessary labor to make this show happen.
And as we're trying to practice our anti-capitalist values, we will not be selling ads on this show. We rely completely on community support to keep the show going. So if you're able to support us, please consider subscribing to our Patreon.
For just $5 a month, you get access to our entire back catalog of premium episodes, and you'll be directly supporting this show. You can also leave us a one-time contribution in our tip jar, and you can find all of those links in the episode description in your podcast player or by going to mvcpod.com.
You can also help us out for free by leaving a rating and review for this show on your podcast player. It only takes a few seconds, and it is very helpful in boosting the algorithm and getting this show in front of more people, so we really appreciate it.
All right, we are going to take a break, but we will be right back with Karen DiConcetto talking about Clueless.
All right, today we are joined by Karen DiConcetto, which is the proper Italian pronunciation we just discussed. Karen started her career as a performer and was half of the UK pop duo Daphne and Celeste. They had 3 top 20 singles, and their song Ugly was on the Bring It On soundtrack. Oh my God, Karen. I'm learning all of this just now. Although they disbanded in March of 2015, they returned to the music scene with their catchy single You and I Alone and made the Guardian's Best Tracks of 2015 list. As a writer in 2007, Karen co-wrote and co-starred in the political satire I Dig Dug at the New York Fringe Festival, which won Best Play and went on for an off-Broadway extension. In addition to writing on ABC Family's Ruby and the Rockets and Nickelodeon's The Troop, Karen co-created the series Recovery Road and served as the executive producer and showrunner. She was also the executive producer and showrunner of Scam Austin on Facebook Watch. Wow, Karen. Very impressive. I'm learning all of this right now as we're speaking. Welcome to Movies versus Capitalism.
Oh my God, it's so funny. I haven't read that bio in a very long time, and I don't actually even know when that bio was from. So hearing that was funny. I mean, I really went through it.
It was a very detailed bio.
Flashed before your eyes.
It was very detailed. I don't know if it didn't necessarily need to be as detailed, but thank you.
But we're gonna dig into more detail right now, Karen, because obviously we're all friends. We know you, but I think both Frank and I don't know as much about your pop star career, which we're not saying this flippantly. This is very real. You were part of this pop duo. You were living my childhood dreams. So I want to hear, for the sake of the film we're about to discuss, paint the picture a little bit, because you were part of the 90s pop star thing.
Yeah, I was in a manufactured pop band. I auditioned in New York to be part of this pop duo. And when I got, and it was just, you know, they had a deal in the UK. So they flew us to London. And then we were, you know, in London for a couple of years in this pop band. And it was this crazy, it was such a fun, crazy time to be in the pop world. This is pre-Napster. So like that in and of itself should paint the picture. You know, it was a time, it was like right before everything completely changed in the music industry, you know, so, you know, no one really cared, like, in terms of, like, money, like, everything was a tax write-off, and, like, everyone was making so much money, so when they first asked us where we wanted to live, I had seen the movie Notting Hill, and I was like, oh, should we live in Notting Hill? And so, like, so we lived in this, like,
And how old were you?
This amazing, like, flat. I was 17 when I auditioned for it, and then I was 18 when I went over there. And Celeste, my bandmate, she was younger, so we had you know, there was a guardian, and we met at the audition, and then suddenly we were, you know, living together and, you know, working together and
Creative collaborators.
That's so wild.
I'll send you a video. Our big claim to fame is that we were the first and only pop band to ever play the Reading Rock Festival. I can't believe that's not in my bio, but so I'll send you the video. But we played with, like, we were on the main stage with Rage Against the Machine and Blink-182, and
Holy
there were
shit.
a lot of really unhappy people who came to our performance. So it's worth a watch.
That's incredible.
Can I ask how you made the transition from pop stardom to playwright and television writer?
Well, so I was a kid actor. So it all started with, like, being, you know, just a kid performer. So I was a kid actor, and I auditioned to be in the pop band. You know, I think when I was younger, I probably thought that I, like, wanted, like, I had Broadway aspirations or something. And then I was in this pop band. And then when I came back, I, you know, returned to, you know, just acting and auditioning. I'd always wanted to write, but it was always on my list of things that I wanted to do, you know, career-wise. And it wasn't until I wrote this play with my friend that was this political satire. It wasn't until then that it became a career thing. And, you know, I was obsessed with, this was it started in 2004. I guess, you know, I don't know if you can relate to this, but, like, when I was younger, if I made a certain amount of money, I would just, like, take a break sometimes, and I wouldn't have, like, a survival job. I would just, you know, if I made, like, $5,000, I was like, ooh, I'm good. Like, I got this, you know. So
I did that once, yeah.
So I had just come off of some job where I'd made money, and so I didn't have a survival job. So I was home all the time watching C-SPAN. I loved C-SPAN. I was really into the 2004 presidential election. And I loved C-SPAN because it was so boring, and you could, like, see all of the presidential hopefuls, like, you know, at clam bakes and just, like, at a diner, just talking to people, you know. So it was really, I did a real deep dive into it. I loved Howard Dean, loved him. And
Classic.
Yeah, classic. So one day a friend of ours came over, and she was like, you know, can we turn on MTV? And I was like, yeah. I was like, you know what? Like, I haven't seen a video in so long. Like, all I watch is C-SPAN. And my friend who I wrote the play with was like, we need to write a monologue about that. So that's where that launched the play for us, like the beginnings of the kernel of an idea. And then from that, you know, from there, we were really lucky. We got representation based off the play. And then, you know, our agent at the time, who's now my manager, he said, you know, have you ever thought about like working in television? And we were like, well, we would love to work in television, because, you know, we were kids. You know, as a kid, I would come home and I would watch hours and hours and hours of television. There was no such thing as, like, you know, limiting screen time in my world. And, you know, Rochelle and myself both were like, we loved TV. And so we kind of just, you know, kind of got into it, and we wrote spec scripts, and we started, you know, just sort of reading all these books on, like, you know, television structure. And, you know, that was the beginning of our career in TV. And, you know, that's what I've been doing ever since.
So long story short, you're just successful at every creative endeavor that you've pursued. Hyper talented is the explanation.
I don't know about all that, but you know, I do think that with creativity, if you're creative in one area, chances are you're creative in another area as well. You know?
Agreed. Yeah.
So
okay, well, you chose quite the film for us to watch. We're talking about Clueless, which it's perfect for you, and you're again in this pop star group. You're sort of like centered in to me when I think about like that 90s aesthetic, and also your show. Yeah. Do you pronounce it scam or scam? Scam, right?
It's scam.
Scam, which
it is scam. Okay.
I loved Scum. It's on Facebook Watch, and both you and our mutual best friend Jessie, who was also on the podcast Barbie episode, wrote on that show, and it's such a great look at the world of teenagers, and so it makes a lot of sense that we're talking about Clueless. So let's jump into it. 1995, Clueless comes out. It's written and directed by Amy Heckerling. It stars Alicia Silverstone, Stacey Dash, Brittany Murphy, and Paul Rudd, and more. But those are our leads.
Let's not forget Dan Hedaya.
Budget of $12 million. Worldwide box office was about $56.6 million. Might be more by now. And if you haven't seen Clueless in a while, let's refresh your memory. It's based loosely on Jane Austen's Emma. It's a teen comedy set in Beverly Hills. It follows the rich and socially successful Cher Horowitz as she navigates teenage life's challenges. Cher sees herself as a matchmaker and initially coaxes two teachers into dating each other in order to get her grades up. Alongside her friend Dion, she gives a makeover to new student Ty, inadvertently boosting her popularity. As Cher grapples with friendships, crushes, and her relationship with her stepbrother Josh, she realizes her own need for personal growth beyond mere appearances.
So, a little bit of historical context for when this film came out. As Rivka mentioned, it is 1995. Bill Clinton is in his third year as the 42nd president of the United States. Dunkaroos and Lunchables are trending foods, and Starbucks has just introduced the Frappuccino. In January, the O.J. Simpson murder trial begins in Los Angeles. And in August, there is the second largest corporate takeover ever when Walt Disney agrees to purchase ABC Cap Cities for $19 billion. Forrest Gump wins the Oscar for Best Picture, and ER is the most popular TV show, and Sheryl Crow wins a Grammy for Best New Artist. Time Magazine's Person of the Year is Newt Gingrich. That's such a bummer. Also, Crayola introduces scented crayons, and only 14% of Americans use the World Wide Web. There is no Google. Netscape Navigator is the most popular web browser, and in July, Amazon.com opens for business. Wow.
Big year.
Big year.
So many things that defined, I feel like, my childhood, including this film.
Yeah, and I really looked up to Newt Gingrich at that time, too. So this all
totally
tracks.
knew who that was.
The Person of the Year, I'm kind of reeling from that.
Look, I was 7 years old. I saw that guy on C-SPAN, and I was like, that is the coolest dude I have ever seen. I went as Newt for Halloween that year.
So, Karen, we always like to start by asking our guest, why did you pick this movie for us to watch in this context?
Well, firstly, I was looking for something that was going to be fun, that was going to be light. And, you know, when I remember going to see Clueless. I'm older than you. So I was 14, I think, when the movie came out. I was between 8th and 9th grade, and I went to see it like 3 times in the movie theater. I loved it. And so I think it was also just like thinking about a movie that I loved, and then also thinking about this podcast and what the movie, you know, capitalism, yes, but also like the consumerism in that movie is like, you know, next level. And I was really curious to watch it from this perspective and have a conversation about it, because, you know, when I first saw the movie, like, I don't think I even realized like how much it impacted my fashion. But as I started like really thinking about it over the past, you know, couple of days, that year after, like that like 6-month period after I saw Clueless, it was the only time in my life that I've like circled things in magazines and said to my mom, like, I want this Calvin Klein chain, like it was a chain belt. And I was like, I want this belt. I don't care. Like if it's the only Christmas present I get, this is what I want, is this belt. And I don't think I quite connected that like Clueless had come out like 3 months before I suddenly was obsessed with like a Calvin Klein chain link belt.
I totally relate. I feel like I had memories I feel like it's the first time I also was like the Delia's magazine, like circling things. But but what I remember more than anything is like the desperation underneath it, which came from this, because I saw this in theaters many times. I loved this movie. I remember seeing it it was a time where we would go, actually the theater's still up here, Cobble Hill Cinemas, but they put plastic bags on it because they were like, it was the lice epidemic of the 90s. I mean, I'm sure there's still lice, but it was like big lice falling on people's desks.
Oh my God.
It was like, I feel like
oh my God.
So they were like, you have to. That's a core memory of wrapping the thing with plastic. So I loved it. But I was like 8. Everything that I digested about the hierarchy and the class system, that was the urgency underneath the need for these clothes, because I think the main message that I walked away from it with was, if you want to survive, if you want to be at the top of the food chain in any context of schooling, you need to look a certain way and acquire these clothes. And super early on shaped a lot of how I felt I needed to navigate to stay safe in a really toxic way, even though I still love it and hold it so to my heart.
Karen, can I ask real fast where you grew up?
So I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, famous for Bethlehem steel. And then I moved to the city when I came back and forth like to the city like to audition as a kid. And my uncle lived here. And so I always really just wanted to live in New York. And when I was 16, my brother was in a Broadway show and my mom got an apartment in the city. And so I started school here. So I went to high school for my last couple of years here.
So we're all experiencing this from like an East Coast perspective, because this is a very California, Los Angeles movie.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh, that's the other thing about Clueless is that when I moved to LA, basically everything I knew about LA was from Clueless. So like when I first moved there, I was like, oh, I don't want to go to the Valley, because in the movie, the Valley's like so bad. And the driving, I was like terrified of driving because of that.
Dion on the Highway is documentary footage of me learning to drive, and Frank can attest to that.
I can absolutely. Yep. A terrifying period for all drivers in Los Angeles was Rivka's first year in LA.
Oh my God. Same.
Everywhere in LA is 20 minutes apart, Like I'll remember that forever from this movie.
Yes. So that's a very, you're right though, Frank. It's interesting because I had never been to California when I saw the movie. So it definitely was like a very different kind of like alternate reality in a lot of ways, everything about the movie and everything about their experience. And I think now, something that I was kind of surprised by in a good way is that it held up in terms of like the writing and the characters and the story. Like it all held up really, really well. And it wasn't, I think there are a lot of movies from that period, especially teen movies, that have a lot of cringe moments, like where it's like, oof, like characters say things that are, that certainly no character would utter now. And I didn't feel like it was too, I don't feel like anybody says friend of Dorothy anymore, but like, I feel like it wasn't like it wasn't offensive in the way that some movies from that era can be now.
No, it's not like when like watching American Pie now and you're like, oh, that's sexual assault. Like that is a full on, like that's full on sexual assault that's played for laughs and for like, look how funny and sexy this is. Yeah, this doesn't have a lot of that going on in it.
It doesn't, which was great to like, I think especially for like my wanting to believe that I've always had good taste. I think it was like it was reassuring in that sense. But I think also it's interesting now, talking about privilege, the way that we talk about privilege now versus then. I think it's really interesting, and sort of this character who, like, her very, everything about her life is privilege. And she thinks that her opinion matters, and she thinks that she has all the answers, and she thinks she knows how to fix everything because of that privilege and entitlement.
It's really impressive how, like, Cher's privilege, or like most of these characters in this high school's privilege, kind of like manifests in every like detail of how they live their lives. Like the way that Cher drives is so reckless and dangerous, but you're like, oh, that tracks, because this is a person who like literally is like, there are no consequences. They're like, there never will be. So like, why do I need to learn how to drive? With the one of the inciting incidents of the movie is her getting a C in debate class and just or getting like poor grades in a bunch of her classes, and understanding that like she's not going to have to work to get her grades better. She just has to like go and use her privilege and her arguing skills to just get better grades, just like totally like skipping over any sense of like meritocracy. Yeah, it's really incredible.
I was just gonna say, that's so brilliant, that part, because we also see that her father totally celebrates this, and therefore we kind of fall into celebrating it a little bit, which we can get into what that does psychologically to the audience. But we see the system and the structure that it's like, this is the world of capitalism. This is this world of elitism. It doesn't, education doesn't matter. What matters is you'll be applauded for figuring out how to do the least amount of labor and reap the most reward. And that is the system, and that is how Cher's been raised, and that's what she sees in her father. And, I think it is to credit the writing that we also see her father doesn't seem to be a happy man. Like, it doesn't lead towards a happy place. He's very stressed and screaming all the time. Gives a great
with his big cell phone.
Doesn't have love. Yeah. So
he's got high cholesterol. He's stressing himself out way too much.
No love. He can't even eat a burger when he has to work late hours.
But you're right, Rivka. When she comes back with the better grades, she says, like, are you happy? He's like, I wouldn't be any prouder than if you had earned the grades yourself in the first place.
So satisfying.
I'm so glad I get to talk to you two about this, because like it sounds like both of you had a similar experience where like subconsciously this movie kind of like ginned up your consumerism and your subconscious need to, I don't know, like play within the high school social hierarchy based on all of these like materialistic goods. Because as a guy, like, I mean, I remember seeing this in high school and being like, oh, like funny movie, but like that part of it never hit me where I was like, oh man, I need to go shop now. And I find that really interesting, because the note I wrote down, which I was like, this is like my big brain take on this, is that this movie is the Wolf of Wall Street for rich teenagers, meaning that it is like satirizing and lampooning like this lifestyle. Like, clearly Amy Heckerling has her opinions about the privilege of all of these kids, but in the way that the film is portrayed, it could be viewed as like a glorification. Similarly, like how in The Wolf of Wall Street, Scorsese is being like, these guys are the fucking worst people on planet Earth, but there are still so many men who come out of that movie and they're like, well, I guess I'm getting into finance now. Like, that was the coolest shit I've ever seen. So,
well, also when you see a movie too, and I think that, when we were young, we were at this impressionable point in our lives, and we didn't even necessarily, I didn't realize this until I rewatched it this week. I didn't realize the way that it had impacted me. I also didn't think about the other part, that the thing that I think does not hold up as well is the diet stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a lot more in there and again, I was like, oh, like, how do we internalize this when we're young versus when you're older, and, you internalize in a different kind of way. We have different kind of language now. Back then everybody was on a diet.
And my Bens, they don't feel nothing like steel.
I love that line. That was really good. I mean, one of my favorite lines of all time is, "You're a virgin who can't drive."
Oh, so good.
That was way harsh, Ty. Like, I mean, that was our catchphrase. Like in high school, it's always. I mean, I feel like still as an adult, like I still say it sometimes. That was way harsh, Ty.
And on this rewatch, like Alicia Silverstone's delivery of that line, she's like so hurt. Good. Like she's like welling up in tears. I was like, damn, she's so good in this movie.
She's so good. I was just going to say, I think you're really onto something, Frank. And I have the same feeling that this is clearly really brilliant satire. And yet, because of maybe it's the direction, the way it's painted and the world, it's so lovely. It's so charming. You can tell, and I've heard in interviews that Amy Heckerling loved Cher. Like, that Cher was the character, that turned into a TV show because she could write Cher forever. And Cher is such a wonderful character. For me, as I was rewatching, I felt like Cher serves as this metaphor for the U.S. charity model. Essentially, the charity model being, affluent elites in government who set terms of aid and relief and social services. And that charity model in our country is rooted in this moral hierarchy, right? That wealthy people and the elite are seen as superior and virtuous. And, poor people need them. We wouldn't know any other way. And so they need the wealthy elite to give them a makeover, if you will. And so Cher personifies this mindset, especially in her relationship with Ty. So when Ty enters, right, Ty is her project. She's this new girl entering into this elitist, where we've already seen the different class hierarchies. She has a vaguely Brooklyn accent, which is supposed to signify...
I love it.
signify to us,
accent.
which is very similar to how Amy Heckerling speaks herself. So it's like she, to me, sounds the most like the writer, but it's so funny that it's like her and the white robber archetype who holds Cher up in the valley have the same accent. So there's just like this hint that you're like, the poor class have the working class Brooklynite. But of course, Brittany Murphy is brilliant. She literally says to Ty when she meets her, she tells Josh when Ty's in the other room and she's taken on her project, I'm rescuing her from teenage hell. I'm going to take that lost soul in there and make her well-dressed and popular. Her life will be better because of me. That is the charity model mindset. And what comes with the charity model is, of course, that as soon as the project that you're trying to help has any kind of agency, you resent it. And there's always strings attached. So she tells Ty who Ty can date or not date. Ty's like clearly authentically interested in Travis. And she's like, absolutely not. We don't do that. This is how we talk. She's like, we're not going to talk the way you talk. You're going to talk like me. Gives her diet advice, takes all her personal choices. She's not allowed to smoke, only at parties, which is another fascinating aspect of this. And then the moment that Ty starts to find the agency and likes Josh, which I think is also really interesting because Cher doesn't give a fuck about, by the way, her stepbrother, which did creep me out as a child and still creeps me out, even though they're not blood related. She doesn't like Josh until Ty has agency and likes Josh. And I just thought that was also another interesting nuance of the elite being like, oh, is that the thing we like now? You watch the Kardashians do it, oh, that's the new trend. Actually, it's mine. That's what I've wanted and I like all along, and now I'm going to take it. So it's Ty who likes Josh, and then Cher likes Josh. It's the turning point. As soon as Ty has agency, Cher in her like white privilege and elite privilege says, I'm in an alternate reality or something. She just like can't understand what's happening if she's not in control. And she pivots and just finds another way to be like the performative charity helper and becomes captain of the Pismo Beach Relief Fund.
It's an amazing joke.
It's amazing. It's so good.
Yeah, if you haven't rewatched it in a while, there's basically like what takes us through the third act is there's been some sort of disaster. What's the disaster in Pismo Beach?
The Pismo Beach disaster.
Like a hurricane or something. So Cher is like, I will be in charge of the Pismo Beach disaster relief. There's a great scene where she's tabling for it and like the camera pans over like actual organizers that are doing like it's like save the world, save the trees, and then it's like Pismo Beach and everyone's at the Pismo Beach table, which speaks to this charity metaphor that you're laying out, Riv, which is like whatever Cher thinks is the most important thing to focus on, that becomes everyone's central focus.
I was just going to say there's a great book, Mutual Aid, by Dean Spade, that's the alternative to this model, is mutual aid.
It's seeing, her being such a product of like not only like of her like smaller society, the one that the one that we're speaking about, the privilege, but then it's also like she really truly is in a lot of ways this like embodiment of like capitalism.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it is, as you said, brilliant satire, but it's also like she is, she is the product of hers, like of all of that, as opposed to like, rebelling against that, which I guess is like the Josh, like, archetype in this world, right? She's the one who is just completely and totally a product of this world. And, I think what's interesting is like, at the end, you're sort of like, well, who's actually changed in the equation? Is it Josh who's changed, or is it Cher that's changed? And has she just brought him closer to her as opposed to him bringing her closer to, caring about CNN, for example?
Yeah, you're right. It is kind of like, it's like a fairly weak close, like final arc for Cher, but I think that's kind of intentional in that, like, she only becomes just like this, like the slightest bit more empathetic. Like the whole early part of the movie, she won't let Ty be with Travis. She's like trying to force Ty to be with Elton, who absolutely sucks. But then like Cher's change is that she's just like, she like loosens up a little bit. She's like, Ty, you can be with Travis, and like, oh, I'm gonna help Pismo Beach, and oh, I'll actually like maybe consider my stepbrother who I had written off. And these are, I guess, playing within the social hierarchies within the high school, within Beverly Hills. But then you zoom out and you keep in mind, like, all of these people are insanely wealthy. Like, there's not, like, she hasn't really changed her outlook and her internal class conflict that she's applying to everybody else. It's just like, okay, you decided to like other types of rich people.
Nor is she offering any material change to Ty.
No.
Right. And I think that even like, I think that last scene when like they're like, at the, they're at the wedding, which like even when I was younger, I thought that wedding scene was it was very odd that they're at the teacher's wedding. Like, I get
so bizarre.
It's so weird. But at the end, when he comes up to her and he's like, oh, there's like a $200 bet going, and like, who's going to get the bouquet? And it's like, oh, like, is he now like gone a little bit closer to the dark side? It feels like this movie hardly feels like an indictment of this. It's a satire, but it also doesn't feel like an indictment of the system.
Totally. Although there's so much potential.
That's a really good way of putting it.
But it doesn't feel, but I think that, when you're mentioning like, like Clinton's third year in office and sort of where we were at as a country, I think it feels very much of its time. And also when you're talking about like aiding other countries and being, I don't feel like neoliberalism was necessarily it was criticized in, academic circles, but I hardly feel like it was something that was actually, that people were reading articles about or discussing and, in the paper or something.
It's kind of bubbling up. It's like just in getting going. Yeah. And actually that's such a great point, because in a lot of ways you could critique this through the lens that this aids in that. I mean, maybe Josh really is sort of that neoliberal character who just kind of, let's move to the center for love, which actually echoes a lot of what we saw in You've Got Mail, that feeling of love, politics, like, who cares if you have to bend a little and move your moral compass? She's hot. Who cares if she's my sister?
Love wins.
Who cares if I'm 19 and she's 16?
That's right. The other part. Would that fly anymore? Like, I mean, could you really? I don't
Better
think
fucking
that
not.
you could write. I don't think you could write that anymore. Where she's sick.
Well, you have. I mean, they still make movies like that. Call Me by Your Name.
Oh yeah. I mean, but that's I mean, but like a mainstream teen comedy. Would they be able to do that? I don't think so.
No, I don't think they'd make them step siblings anymore. Just like, we didn't need that. We didn't need it. Could have been a neighbor. Could have been a family friend.
It helps that everybody looks 40. Like, everybody, when they go to the college party and there's a 50-year-old man who's like the college student, just to justify them using 30-year-olds as high school, like, everyone's age is totally off.
Well, that's enough. Their ages are totally off. The other thing that cracks me up about the parties is that I forgot how lame the parties were. Like, the parties do not look that fun.
You wouldn't really?
No.
I would go. No, maybe.
You'd go to those parties?
Oh, yeah, that looks...
You'd go to the Valley party?
I'd go to that Valley party. Suck and blow? Sign me up.
I've been to some Valley parties. Don't knock the Valley parties.
I'm not knocking Valley parties, but I felt like then the college party with like I was like, who is this band? I had to like look it up. That it was like the Mighty Mighty Boss
The Mighty
Tones.
Mighty Boss Tones. My first live concert.
What?
Wow.
Oh yeah, I was not. It was a buddy of mine, and they were doing. He was a big fan of the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, and they were doing like a free concert in Philly, and so we went. And I was like, wow, I don't know anything about this. Is this what all music is like? This is not that good.
Wow.
That's so funny.
They had that guy whose only job in the band was to dance on stage. So like when you see in the movie that one guy who's just dancing, like that's a member of the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones. And that's all he did. He didn't play an instrument. He didn't sing. They were just like, it was different back then. Music industry. They were like, can we get a per diem for our dude who just dances and doesn't do anything?
That's funny. The other one, this is just a funny thing. Like Elton and the Cranberries CD. I forgot about that. Like how he loves the Cranberries. He like talks about it in school. He's like, I've got to go get my Cranberries CD or something. And then he like plays it in the car. Like the Cranberries, a way to bring it back.
Just one more point about the Cher of it all. I don't know that Cher gets enough credit as this archetype that sets up Legally Blonde. I mean, we see this character over and over again. I'm sure there's ones before this, but she particularly sets up this, I put on the dumb facade. Like, I dress up and I'm performatively dumb on the outside, but well-meaning on the inside. So any harm I cause didn't have harmful intention. And I think that's so dangerous and sets up also what we see in our forgiveness then later on of the Paris Hiltons and the heiresses and certainly the Kardashians, And actually I'm very smart and could go to law school. So I should be trusted, So I am still, again, this like moral superiority of like, why I have my money is because I work really hard. I'm just thinking about like Kardashians built their whole brand on that,
And it also is like in the movie, like the fact that she literally argues her way into getting A's. It's like she doesn't actually work, but she feels like she's working. And so sort of the illusion of working versus the actual work and like what, like it feels like there are blurry lines between those two things.
Yeah.
In this sort of more, in this world that we're talking about.
And the last thing I want to hit on her relationship with Ty, because I think that is really like the central relationship of this movie. We've hit a lot of it just about how like Ty is portrayed as like the lower class person in this film, just in like all of her habits and her speech and her dress. And it really broadcasts to the audience that like if you are, let's say, not conventionally attractive, you don't dress well, you don't speak well, then you are a less valuable person. And that message doesn't really get corrected at the end because like the only change that Ty makes and that Cher still makes for Ty is, yeah, you can be with Travis, the skater stoner dude. Like that's the one change. Like I would have loved to have seen Cher come into high school in like sweats with no makeup on. And, like that would have been a more effective arc, I feel like, if her coming and being like, you know what, none of this shit matters. We're all basing this, like this whole social hierarchy doesn't matter. I want to be comfortable. No one should give a shit about this stuff anymore. And then like seeing all of the disparate cliques in high school just kind of like merging all together and being like, yeah, why are we all just like, why are only the TV people sitting with the TV people, stoners with the stoners, popular with the popular? But I feel like the end, it just like really reinforces kind of like Cher's privilege and perspective.
Yeah. And I think also if it was really going to push through the satire to the very end, that wouldn't be Cher's ending, right? So it's kind of like it's a satire up until Act 3, where then it sort of turns into something that's a little bit more, for lack of a better word, like earnest and love, and like it sort of it shifts. And I didn't feel that shift tonally, but Frank, you're right that like the tie of it all is sort of just left, And then it's like, oh, I'm sorry, and make up, everything's fine.
Yeah.
Where really, you almost want to see Ty not forgive, and what does that look like in Cher's world?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
And then the other thing is that what you're talking about, actually, Tina Fey did it in the Mean Girls. She did that.
That's right.
She did it. She did it. She
She
did
did do
that
it.
moment at the end, and it works really well, you know. But I think with this one, it's like I feel like that those last moments, like the tie and share, like, you know, if the roles were really reversed, I think it would have like taken on a full satire.
And with the ending that it has, it's not surprising that like you two as like young women, as little girls, and probably little girls around the country were like, oh, I need to be like this. Like this is the archetype. Like like now I must do this, rather than offering like a really strong critique of this lifestyle. But again, like, you know, this movie it's brilliant satire, and if you can read between the lines, you pick all of that up. But like, I can totally understand how on a young person's mind you're unable to like really understand the satire of it all.
Yeah, the
Or
cues.
you think you do.
Yeah,
Or
you think you do.
Or you think you do.
And it's the subtle cues, right, that are always underscored. Just to your point about the class divide, on this rewatch, it was so fascinating how the elite class was so filled in. There was so much detail about their life experience. We learn about, you know, Cher's parents and upbringing. We learn less about Dion, but we still learn things through their characters. And all of the working class characters are, again, like we only see them through the eyes of the elite. We don't even really know where Ty is from, how she got there, what her family experience is, other than we do know she's not a virgin, you know, so they're defining these things for us.
And she smokes weed and does coke, which are bad.
Oh my God. My favorite line. Oh shit. You guys got coke here? Yeah. Yeah. This is America. Like the best. But I also think there was another thing I noticed, which was so strange in terms of how each class reacts to stress. We have that moment where, in the classroom, they all get bad grades, and Travis tries to jump out the window, like has this very strong response to like, and it's comic, but he's serious. He plays it in earnest. Like, I have to jump out the window and like kill myself. And, you know, Cher's response to stress is shopping and massages and I'm going to fix the grades. It's not a big deal, daddy. And then Ty has this moment when she gets stressed out as well and she hits her head. And that stood out to me as like, it's so subtle, but what a deep contrast. That's a pretty profound thing to watch someone do and pretty real for like a comedy. She bangs her head against the, I think it's at the diner or a counter. That was just, again, things that you're subtly learning about. Oh, well, a morally superior person would potentially understand how to deal with their stress in a more graceful way, like shop and get a massage. And there's something inferior and debased in this. Those subtle things always fascinate me in what these films are teaching us politically.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I did not see that. Well, then you're right, though. Well, what do you have, right? So it's like really material because it's like, what do you actually have at your disposal? So that, and it's like for Cher, she can do anything, but Ty can't go to the mall and just like spend thousands of dollars. She can bang her head. You know, it's like very, like it's pretty like kind of stark, actually.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's contrasted by how all of these kids at this high school just talk their way out of every single bit of adversity that they encounter. Just like Elton's always going, he's like, Mom, can I just go to the bathroom? Dion during tennis lesson is like, I've got a note from my tennis trainer who doesn't want me to like be training with outside people.
It's so good.
It's so good, but it's brilliant because like when Cher faces like the tiniest bit of adversity in the end, but just like not being as popular as she was, she like has a full-on existential crisis.
Yeah. She's a little less popular. And it's like, it is interesting to think about like what the version of that is now, you know, and it's really interesting to think about like does that story even work in the world of like social media and like sort of what we have, like sort of in the world of the Kardashians? Like, is this, I don't know. It's like,
well, there's this really interesting concept of a window of tolerance, which is sort of that window that you have to be able to really be centered and present for something before you're either in like a hyper emotional state or a hypo emotional state. So where you're really reactive. And for people who've actually experienced maybe a lot of trauma early on, that window of tolerance tends to be a little bit wider because you've had experience being uncomfortable. You've had experiences where you've had to work, you know, so the Ties and the Travis, their window of tolerance
Right.
is going to be a lot wider. I mean, they certainly have experienced a lot more in this film than Cher does. And what we see with Cher is the second anything is beyond her ability to tolerate or slightly uncomfortable because she's been so privileged. Like you said, Frank, she says, this world is crazy. It's just upside down.
Yeah.
She can't
Everything
tolerate
is
it.
off. I always, when I first like saw it when I was young, I always thought the mom line where it's like her mom died and she's just gone. Like there's something, it's just this throwaway line. We only hear about the mom one other time. I always thought that was so interesting, that like this complete lack of a maternal presence, like how that has impacted her life and who she is, you know, like I always thought that little, like, you know, and yes, it's like a ridiculous way that her mom died, but it's also like
Routine
the undercurrents
liposuction.
of, yeah, but like the undercurrents of like what that is, you know, when we're talking about trauma, it's like she doesn't have a mom. So like, yes, she has all the privilege in the world, but she never had a mom. She died when she was a baby.
And the undercurrents of the diet culture, like you're saying, that's a small thing. It's there. But I can't help but also think about, because Brittany Murphy's performance in this is so brilliant, and it's so tragic to think about her journey and her trajectory and what we know of what diet culture and what that psychology and the pressures of capitalism to be thin and Hollywood and where it all intersects, that she felt, from what I've seen in documentaries and read, really terrible about being perceived as, you know, as Ty, even though Ty is the most, her performance is just breathtaking. I think she's so good, but to feel like terrible. And the movie sets her up to feel terrible.
And I think that what's really, I think that it's very strange because when you watch it now, it's like all of that was so normalized. Like that's just how people spoke to each other. That's how we talked. That was like what, you know, there's no one was really thinking. I think in a lot of ways the 90s were like this period where like we thought we had dealt with everything. We were like, gone. Did that, racism, gone. Like it was just like gone. Like we had dealt with all the things.
It's all uphill from here, baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing but only getting better forever and ever.
Yes. That's what I think, that like 2000 was like, I think the Bush v. Gore was sort of like when where reality like sort of, I think, kind of came crashing in, and like that attitude was like, it was completely like was shattered. But I think that before, everyone kind of was like, oh, we're good, you know, everyone's fine, you know, we dealt with all of like the problems. That's how I think. That's what I look when I look at the 90s now. It's just not. I mean, obviously there were people that were really doing the deep work and the deep thinking, but I think culturally a lot of people were on board with like, you know.
Oh yeah, what a weird. I went to a considerably progressive elementary school in Park Slope, public school, but I'll never forget, because I had my mom and dad were separated, which was unheard of, and so I just remember these parents that were supposed to be progressive, but then the treatment that I got, like the shock and awe of having a single mom. Oh, wow. And just I remember so early that visceral feeling of how parents would treat me different, and there was a morality attached to it, which makes me again think about this class experience. And high school and schools is such a great location to explore that, because we almost forgive these hierarchies as like kids, you know, but we understand that we carry that. We learn it. That's where you're learning to socialize. And we literally carry it with us through the rest of our lives. So it's all very intentional.
The fact that you felt that way in I mean, you were in Brooklyn, in probably one of the most progressive elementary schools in the country. And the fact that you felt that way, I can't even imagine how other people were feeling. And then we were being told by the media a very different story.
Everything's fine.
We were being fed a very different kind of narrative. And I think that's what I find so fascinating about the 90s is that, I mean, now we're in this whole other bizarre period in terms of like what, you know, fact versus fiction and, you know, all of that. But in the 90s, it's like what we said we were as a country, as a society, versus what was actually going on behind the scenes.
I think I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that like the 80s and 90s were probably like the weakest points in American history for like the left. And I don't mean liberals, I mean like the left, just like after all of the losses of the late 60s and 70s, and you know, the boomers all selling out, and the absolute transformation of the Reagan Revolution, and then Clinton coming along and being like, I'm basically like Cool Reagan who can play the saxophone, and like I think
Cool Reagan.
That is what fucking
You're right.
Clinton
You're
is.
right.
He's just Cool Reagan. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So what we were getting fed was like, look, Soviet Union is gone. The stock market all-time high. Like we are good. Everyone is good. It's just like enjoy your bits and bobs and your little toys, because that's all we got to worry about.
Sexism doesn't exist anymore. I mean, I think
Nope.
this is the kind of like this was really. I mean, I'm sure you both feel the same, but like as an adult looking back on that period, and like, you know, and I was born in 1980. I was born in like the last month of Jimmy Carter's presidency. And it really is like, it's crazy to think about the fact that like I was an 80s like Reagan, like when consumerism was just at its peak, and I was being marketed to like in a way that, I mean, I think it just got more and more intense. And by the 90s, it was like, it had intensified even more, I would say. But like the way that you are taught to be a consumer from, you know, from your infancy is just really kind of crazy.
The last thing I wanted to hit real fast is, and this might be part of the satire, is like there's a lot of cultural appropriation in this movie. You know, there are there's a whole scene built around a bunch of white kids singing "Rollin' with the Homies." When we're introduced to Christian's character, he's like, he's doing like the whole like, I dig, man, like that thing. And in fact, like Dan Hedaya has a great line where he's like, what did you think the death of Sammy Davis left an opening in the Rat Pack? There was like the one, and then there's the one line of Cher's to their housemaid where she says, I don't speak Mexican, and then she gets upset, and then Josh is like, she's from El Salvador. It's a totally different country. But those are the only moments that I was like, oh, this maybe didn't age super well.
I think the Mexican one actually, I mean, it's so offensive. I mean, it's so offensive, but it also, I feel like because it was because it was corrected immediately and sort of painted Cher in a, you know, pretty bad light, I felt like it gave us an idea of like how she interacts with the world and the people that work for her. And so I felt like that one sort of, you know, it's offensive, and it would be offensive now, and maybe it wouldn't be written now, but I think a version of it would be written.
I'd agree with you.
But you're right. It's played as offensive in the scene. Like Josh is like, what you just said is offensive.
Amy Heckerling loves Cher too much. There's too much love, and there's too much banking on the fact that like they gotta sell this so people love Cher. So I think that's the only part that made it potentially cringy, was just that you're like, yeah, but the fact that we forgive her in spite of it makes it kind of casual racism, but she's a good person, so it's okay.
Yeah, I think that's sort of where it would be. I think the scene would be written slightly differently today,
sure.
You know, because but I do think that like those little moments go a long way towards reminding us that this person she's not this person that we can be rooting for 24/7. You know, in a way that I actually think that like Legally Blonde, and I haven't rewatched in years, but I think that character, she's just so like, she's just unflappable, and she doesn't actually say offensive things to people. She's just really ditzy, you know? So those are differences. I mean, the thing she says to Ty too, like I think could also fall into that category.
Which?
What the kind when she's first there, and it's like she's talking about what she's wearing, and she's talking about like the fact that like she can't smoke weed during the day, and like all of these like judgments on who Ty is.
I mean, I think to your point too, Frank, it's like this elitist class will be like, we don't do drugs, but we do. Like we don't do any of, but we do only when we want to, and when we want to, it's okay. Yeah. Like and I think it makes that point, you know, but could even go farther if they were doing it today. It would be a little bit more courageous you know, your friend Patricia Resnick talked about her sort of darker version of 9 to 5 that she always wanted.
yeah.
And I feel like there's a darker version here that could
yeah.
be just so good.
All right, well, this is the point of the episode, Karen, where we give out awards for this movie. We got 3 of them. The first award is Best Politics. Goes to the character with the best politics in the movie.
Oh, with the best politics?
Best politics, yep.
Well, I guess for me, this is a hard one, so I'll tell you why. So we just were talking about how I think we just decided that Josh is a neoliberal, so that's hard. You know?
Yeah.
I think that it's like it's hard for me to like 100% get on board with those politics. Now, I think it would have been the easy answer. The person that I know less about his politics, but I'm hopeful for his future, would be Travis.
Yeah.
I'd be hopeful for Travis.
I'd have to assume he's going to become radical being a skater boy. Like, just that he's probably more exposed eventually to radical politics.
Yes. What's her name, Miss, the teacher? She seems like she has good politics, too. Her heart is definitely in the right place.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
what's the class that she teaches? Like civics or something? Yeah, she's the one that's like actually trying to organize everything.
Yeah. I think she's maybe the most pure character politically.
Absolutely. I think
that's right. Miss Geist.
Miss Geist.
Yeah.
Yes, Miss Geist.
I think you're right. I think Miss Geist probably has the best politics. I was also going to say Josh because at one point he's like, I want to get into environmental law. But then
he's working with the dad and like.
But then he ends up working with the dad on the corporate law. And Dana Day has the grand line where he's like, environmental law. What do you want to be miserable for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
All right, worst politics. This goes to the character with the worst politics in the movie.
Well, so this is an interesting one because I actually think that a lot of the characters they're apolitical, which is the worst, is bad politics. But I think that a lot of this is the funny thing is that all of those young characters would be like young, not all, a lot of them are probably young Democrats, right? Or young, consider themselves liberal, would vote, whatever their counterparts are today, aren't voting for, Ron DeSantis, for lack of a better word, or lack of a better example.
Not publicly.
Well, yes, this is true. Maybe privately. I think the dad is an easy one because he, clear. But I mean, maybe he isn't either. This is a tough one, guys. I think the worst politics is actually hard.
No, I'm on that track. I think it's probably Mr. Horowitz because he is like he doesn't display any sort of like toxic politics, but he is like a very high-paid corporate lawyer.
Yeah.
So we have to imagine he's a piece of shit, and his clients are pieces of shit. So I think just based on because I mean, and also most of these, like you said, most of the other characters are high school students. So
and also like even when she's doing the Pismo Beach disaster, she's doing the all of that. She's doing the donations and she's taking charge. Like he doesn't even offer like money for the disaster. And like they have
there's
so
hope
much
for
money.
Cher. Even though I do think Cher's politics are representative of something so atrocious, I think she could potentially be like moved and radicalized. It's sad that Josh hadn't. I think it makes Josh worse because Josh didn't even try. Like, but I'm with you. It's got to be the dad. I also don't like the way he parentifies her, and there's something icky about that to me. That's like kind of that relationship. I don't like it.
All right, and our last award is Best Supporting Character / Spinoff. Goes to your favorite supporting character and maybe a spinoff that you would want to see.
So my favorite character since the first time I ever watched it was Ty. Always. Mm-hmm. Ty was always my favorite character. So I always went for that outsider in the world. Like she always was the one that I like loved the most. But there is, who else would be? I mean, we know so little about all the characters. I think that's what's kind of amazing about the movie is that it's such a great cast. No, but I think all of them could be kind of fun.
Totally.
Except for Amber. I have no interest in Amber.
Don't give a shit about Amber.
In the TV series, I feel like Amber's character actually is the one to get a lot bigger and Ty's get smaller. Yeah.
No, that makes no sense to me. No sense at all. I love Is his name Murray, the boyfriend?
Yeah.
Yeah, Donald Faison's
him.
character. Great.
I like that when he's like, don't tell my mom about
Yeah.
him shaving his head. Like, I'm curious to see what that world is. Like, who are they? Where do they, what's
I was
their
shocked
world?
by how many tattoos these high schoolers had. So many 16-year-olds with tattoos.
So many.
I loved, okay, shout out to another line I love when Ty arrives and she's like, wow, you guys talk like grown-ups. And Cher just delivers it perfectly. She's like, oh, well, this is a really good school.
Yeah. The lines are it's so good. Like, it's just really, it's so well written. Like, it really is. And like, and such a perfect cast. So yeah, I think I'd be happy with a lot of spinoffs.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I would watch the Ty prequel movie, where like her life in New York, and then I would also watch the Josh goes to work in corporate law, and then like has like an identity crisis, and is like, I need to become a public defender. Like, this is I'm so empty inside.
Oh my God, can you imagine the dark, like him being just being an overworked public defender. It's like the sequel to Clueless. The other side. What it means to, get paid nothing.
Yep.
And devote your life
And Paul Rudd
to reform.
could play it at any point.
Oh, yeah.
Starting
Yep.
just
Well, 'cause he
picking
doesn't
right.
age.
He doesn't age, picking right back up.
He looks exactly the same age now as he did then. It's insane.
Wild.
It's amazing.
This was such a fun conversation. Before we wrap up, Karen, we ask our guests how in your daily life, is there any way that you practice your anti-capitalist values or any of your values that you would like to share with us?
Sure. I mean, I feel like the biggest way. I was trying to think about this because I actually think I could do more and better, and I welcome suggestions. But the first one is I've always been in unions, and I think that collective labor actions are sort of. I mean, we're seeing them being really incredibly successful in a lot of different sectors right now, and I'm really heartened that it seems like there's a resurgence of union and unionizing efforts. And then the other one is just I think everyone is doing it now, but I really try to do the buy nothing on, there's this buy nothing page on Facebook, and I find that that's really a great place to get things from people and to share things and to try to make sure that you use things for as long as you possibly can and not just like buy. And then also to the same point, trying to get as much, especially for my son, getting as much secondhand as I possibly can. So either getting it for free from people on the parent groups, or exchanging it for money, but between people as opposed to going to a store.
Those are great ones. And yeah, I'm a part of my neighborhood's Buy Nothing group. And yeah, for any of our listeners who've never heard of it, there's probably a Buy Nothing in your
really
neighborhood
good,
on Facebook.
And I feel like they also build a sense of community. And I think that, it's even simple things hey, I'm leaving town and I've got a refrigerator full of veggies. Does anybody need them? Just sort of all of those ways of just sharing from big things to small things. I think I definitely feel like it's helped our sense of community. I don't know if you feel the same way, Frank.
Big time. Yeah. I've given away stuff to people who I didn't see on the street. I was like, oh, did you take that umbrella that we didn't use anymore? And they're like, yep, that was me.
Yeah.
Still using that umbrella.
That's great.
Karen, this was such a fun conversation. Thank you for choosing this movie. I'm so glad we got to do it and got to talk to you about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No,
great.
this was so great and such an interesting way to talk about this film, and I had a great time. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok. And if you want to support the show and get access to our premium episodes, you can go to MVC Pod to find all of that information.
For next week's movie, we'll be watching the 1976 satire of the capitalist media industry, Network.
Thanks, everyone.